Welcome to the Career Connections podcast, where recruiting leader Stephanie Alston and operations leader Amy Thompson share real-world insights to help you navigate the job market, build confidence, and find the right career fit. Let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. I am Stephanie Alston, and I am the CEO of BGG Enterprises, where we connect executive job seekers, to companies who are seeking to hire or outsource more executive talent. And today, Amy and I are going to be having a conversation about why you're not getting interviews. But before we begin, I'm going to let her quickly reintroduce herself to you all in case you are not familiar or if this is your first time tuning in.
Thank you, Stephanie. And hi, everybody. My name is Amy Thompson. I go by the Introverted Entrepreneur online. I also have a company, Optiva Solutions Group, and we do strategic operations consulting for startups and small businesses. And I'm really excited about this topic today.
Yes. So as always, I want to begin with a quick story. Amy and I actually discussed this offline, but I wanted to bring it to you all. And some of you all may chime in and say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But I do want to use this as leverage to, some of the do's and don'ts that may be hurting you in this current labor market. I had a conversation a couple days ago with someone who shared with me that they were looking for someone to fill a role that they had open. And they actually said that someone showed up to an executive job interview with nothing but their hoodie on. They were not dressed in business casual. And I know some of you may be thinking, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'm at home. I'm in the comfort of my own home. It shouldn't matter what I wear. But one of the reasons why not only you're not getting interviews, but also why you're not getting the job is because you're not taking things as seriously as you should. And if you don't take yourself seriously, quite frankly, in this job market, it is going to be extremely hard for others to take you seriously as well. And so I know we live in this world that tells us to show up as yourself, to be real and to be vulnerable. And I get it. All those things are great. But I think we still have to remember that in this world of corporate America specifically, there are still rules that many people abide by. And if you want to remain competitive, you just have to be okay with playing the game, quite simple. And so to kick off today's conversation, specifically not around why you're not getting jobs, but why you're not getting the interviews, I first want to ask you, Amy, why do you think that so many qualified candidates never get interviews?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I feel like there's a couple of reasons. I was kind of in the job market recently myself, and I know one thing that was pointed out to me that I never thought about was my resume. Two parts to that. Number one, I was very used to sending my resume to people that I knew. So it was heavily formatted, and I would just be sending it in an email because previously all of my jobs came from because I knew somebody or somebody in my network. But when you are having your resume reviewed by an ATS, it cannot be formatted like that. And so I'm quite sure that a lot of the jobs that I applied to initially, I wasn't even looked at seriously because my resume probably didn't pass the ATS before it got to a human. So I think one thing is just simply not so much the content of your resume, but the formatting and making sure it's ATS friendly. I think the second thing when it comes to a resume, because the resume, and we talked about this in one of our previous episodes, it's kind of like your way to get in the door, right? It's not going to be the end all be all, but it's the way to get in the door and get that interview. My resume was also 3 pages. So I'm a senior person. I've done a lot of work, but nobody cares about all that. And so I was kind of putting everything onto the resume. And so I did get some advice from somebody that's like, cut it down as short as you can get it and only include the things that are relevant to the specific job you're applying to, which makes total sense. But I was not doing that. I was trying to showcase how well rounded I was or all the different experience I have, and people just don't care about that. So if you are applying for a very specific job, make sure your resume is tailored for that. And I would say those two things. I think there are lots of reasons why, but those are two things just from my own experience that I had to change and kind of adjust my thinking to help increase the chances. I think we'll probably talk about this later in the episode, but the sheer volume of people who are applying for jobs, qualified or not, makes it difficult if you do get past the ATS, once a human looks at it, they're going through so many things. And so in skimming a resume, they could miss something that is, your special sauce or what makes you stand out. So it's a very it can be a very stressful process because you can't really get your skills across and kind of get your message across until you talk to somebody. But there are so many gates before that happens. So it's tough. It's tough.
Right, yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. You talked about the ATS formatting, right? One thing that
Mhm.
I know for sure is that not all ATS systems will even acknowledge bullet points. And so I've been told that unfortunately, whenever you manually upload your resume into some of these ATS systems, it'll pull from your actual resume, but sometimes those bullets come through. And if those bullets are not recognizable, the system can't read your resume at all. What other areas of formatting have you seen that have also gotten applicants thrown at the
Yeah,
system?
any type of graphics, and I see what you're saying because in some cases a bullet can be seen as a graphic. So if you have
Yeah.
lines on your resumes like dividers, I would take those off. On my resume, I simply had like a page number at the bottom, but
Mm,
because I did my resume in Canva, that was actually seen as an image. So at
mm,
all possible, just do it in Word or, Google Doc or something to keep everything text based. So I think images, usually, people have their name up top, they might have a line under it. Remove all of that kind of fluff really and
yeah.
just focus on the words. I have also noticed when I do apply, they give you the option sometimes of, do you want us to import your application from your resume? And so to your point about the bullets, it'll take my resume and then it'll just be text. So very hard to read. It just looks like gibberish or, sentences run together. So I do think that's possible that some systems don't recognize that it's actually a bullet list.
Yeah, that's good. And I actually never thought about the lines and dividers, but you're right. And then, I've had this debate with several candidates before where there have been some folks who say, oh, well, the more creative your resume is, it'll stand out. But it's like, yes, it'll stand out to a human. So if you're
Right.
emailing your resume to a
That's
human,
right.
that could be very different. But we're talking specifically to the ATS system. And if you don't know what ATS stands for, that's just applicant tracking system. So that's like your work days, teamwork. I can't think of all of them. There's so many
Yeah, there's
greenhouse.
a lot.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
but
Yep.
most companies do use an ATS system whenever
Yep.
you're applying. So just as an FYI, if you're like, what are they talking about? Okay, so Amy, let me ask you this: how do you think that technology like ATS and even AI tools have changed the screening process?
Yeah. I think it's like pros and cons of it. Obviously, from the business side, from the recruiter side, it helps them get through information faster and hopefully weed out people who aren't qualified. But like we talked about before, you can also be weeding out people who are qualified. So it's definitely, you have to weigh kind of, if you have a lot of jobs that you're looking to fill, ATS is probably, and technology is probably helpful for that. I think
Yeah,
from the candidate perspective, it's kind of tough because, I think if you take the time to customize and tailor your resume, which I would always recommend, it's almost like I'm not like it's artificial. I'm not saying that, but it's almost like you're trying to play the game, right? You're trying to make sure that your resume gets through the first step. And so it seems like it takes a little bit more work to then get through that first gate to get to an interview. And so I think there are obviously positives to it, but also some negatives. So you have to kind of balance what's most important to you. And frankly, getting the job should be most important. So do what you need to do and, play the game, use the technology, write your resume for that ATS so that you can make it to the next step, which is to get the interview.
right. Yeah. And I definitely agree with you. I think technology is more helpful on the HR side, especially
Mhm.
now with the volume.
Yep.
And it could just feel like you're running into a brick wall as a
Yeah.
candidate. So, Amy, even when we talk about these ATS systems, and I know we've probably discussed this a little bit before in previous episodes, but in your opinion, what role does timing play in helping you get noticed? Is it better to apply early versus late? If you see that a role has been up for a certain amount of time, should you just leave it alone? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure what the right answer is to that one. When I was early applying to jobs, if I saw, because nowadays, if it's been posted for 24 hours, it has a ton of, applications already if you're looking at LinkedIn numbers. But, so I used to bypass things. If I went down, I have LinkedIn Premium, so you can see the exact number, and they have 1,200 people who've applied. I'm not applying for it. But then I saw this young lady on TikTok. She was like, I don't care how many people applied. If I feel like I'm qualified and I want the job, I'm going to apply to it. So I think it just depends on, how much time you're putting into applying to jobs, because it is very time consuming, how much time you want to spend doing that. As far as like, I do think again, it's so dependent upon the company, right? Because some people are really transparent in their job descriptions. Some people are not looking at resumes as they come in. They are waiting until they're like, hey, we're going to leave this open for 2 weeks, and then we're
Right.
going to go through everything. So then there's not a real benefit to being first. But some people might go through them as they come in. And then if they find enough qualified candidates to interview, then they shut it down. So
Right.
then you're at risk if you wait. So it really is something you have to play by ear, and then set your own preferences for how you want to kind of run your job search, because it does vary, I think, a lot on the individual companies and how they're approaching it.
Yeah. And you know what, Amy, you just raised an interesting point about seeing the number of applicants who have applied for a role. And I
Yeah.
think I understand the logic behind it, right? Why platforms like LinkedIn will tell you how many folks have applied just so you know how much competition you're up against. But I also think that it could also psych a person out, like you said, from applying
Yep.
when just because 1,000 people have applied does not mean 1,000 qualified candidates have
That's
applied.
right.
I also want to reiterate too is that on LinkedIn specifically, when you see how many folks have applied, that number is not always accurate because it only shows how many people have clicked the actual link.
Yep.
Um, and so it doesn't show how many people who've actually gone through and fully completed the resume. Because what I found is like when folks apply for a job, if the application is really long or it takes them to a third party place, they tap out because they don't want to go
Yeah.
through all of that filling out a whole application. But then also on the flip side of things, I'm kind of with the girl on TikTok a little bit. I don't care how many people have applied, only because this is new knowledge that we've obtained, right? Over
Mm.
the years, we've applied for jobs, not knowing how many people have applied. I mean,
Right.
it could be 10 million people applied. We didn't know, but now because we know, suddenly we've stopped taking shots. And I
Yeah.
think it was Michael Jordan one time who said, like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I get, I totally get it though. When you see that number, it is overwhelming, and you're just like, look, I'm trying to find a job today. I don't have time to compete with 10,000 people on an open
Right.
job. So I guess I see both sides of the argument.
And I think,
Go ahead.
it's great points. And I think that, back to your other question, is technology helping or hurting, right? And in that scenario, it's like, do I really need to know how many other people applied, like you said? And then LinkedIn also tells you of the people who've applied, in parentheses, because they might not have actually submitted their application, how many of them have a master's degree? How
Oh
many
yeah,
have this? You get all this information. It's like, why do I need to know? So it can be too much
yeah,
sometimes too. And
yeah.
like you said, it can psych you out. And it's like, man, I'm not applying for that. And yeah, but I will say that young lady on social, she did encourage me. After I heard her talk about it, I was like, you know what? She is right. Like, who cares? Just if I want to apply for the job, I'm going to apply.
Yeah.
But it's tough. So the introduction of technology can be good and bad.
Yeah.
It can be good and bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually read this very interesting statistics, which probably will not encourage anyone to want to apply for any job, but it says only about 3% of applicants get an interview for corporate roles, which
Yeah.
means that the competition and screening process makes the interviews very selective.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Hearing that only 3% of applicants only get an interview for corporate roles,
Yeah.
does it feel
I believe it.
more
I
selective?
definitely believe it. The
Yeah,
the the number of people who are looking for jobs, the number of when I do look at that number, even if it's not 100% accurate, it's still close, right? You see
right.
1,000 people have at least clicked on this, right? They're interested in it. It's tough, and I also know how important, we had an episode on networking, how important that is, and the reality is most people hire people that they know or people that have been referred to them. So that number does not surprise me. I don't actually have too much of a reaction, like, it doesn't make me discouraged to apply because it just seems very factual. But
Yeah.
like you said with that quote, you're not going to get a job if you don't apply.
Yeah.
So might as well apply for the things that you think you can do. And then over time, you'll find something, that fits.
Yeah. So let's get into some tangible things, right, that we can help our audience with. What are we'll say what are two ways a candidate can make sure that their resume stands out, whether it's in the ATS system or even whenever they're applying directly to say a recruiter or a hiring manager.
Yeah. I definitely think short and sweet, right? I think that was probably one of the bigger lessons that I learned, which is funny because I've worked on the HR side and I'm always complaining about how long people's resumes are. And so short, sweet, and to the point, and make it clear that you actually are interested in the job. So if you are one of those people that just sprays out your resume to everything that's open, once it gets to a human being, that's not going to be very attractive, where it looks like you didn't even read the job description, right? You have things on here that don't even make sense to what we're looking for. So make sure, I'm a big proponent of tailoring your resume for each job. It certainly takes longer to do that. But if it does make it to a human, they will see that you are in fact interested in that position, because it's a waste of time if you apply to something and then what if you do get an interview and then you're not even really that interested.
Right.
That's wasting your time, wasting their time. So I definitely encourage people to tailor their resume. If you don't tailor the whole resume, at least the summary, and hopefully you have a summary on your resume. Remember that people don't really read. And I think the statistic for resume review might be 5 or 6 seconds or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's very short of
Yeah.
how much time these recruiters or HR folks, if it makes it to a human, it's going to be less than 10 seconds that they spend looking at your resume. So having a summary towards the top is great. I also recommend having a headline. So headline meaning, tagline or a couple of phrases that indicate like what you're about. Your summary is kind of like your elevator pitch. So even before you get into your experience, they can get a glimpse of whether, it's worth their time or not. And so I think there are some small tweaks people can make on their resumes to help stand out a little bit. The other thing I would say, I don't do this enough, but follow up with people. So do your research on the company. If you can find out who the hiring manager is or who the recruiter is, send them a message on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I just applied for this position, just to let them know, because that kind of repetitive, like seeing your name multiple times could
Right.
also help. If they've got hundreds of names that they're looking through, but then they see your resume, they remember that they got a message from you. So that could be helpful as well. But those are a couple things I would suggest.
No, I love it. I think all of that is great advice. Let me also ask you this, and then I know we have to wrap up for today. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I
Mhm.
recently saw this video on social media that went viral that talked about resume gaps.
Mhm.
And what they said is that this particular hiring manager said is that they hate seeing resume gaps. And so
Mm.
they believe that on your resume, if you have a gap, say between I don't know, 2023 and 2024, write it out like you're posting your job experience and explain that resume gap on your actual resume. What are your thoughts about resume gaps? Do you see that as a red flag, or are you understanding and and will you just decide, hey, I'll just have a conversation about them in person, about their
Yeah.
gap versus judging them just based off of it?
Yeah, as a hiring manager, as someone in HR, when I was in that function, I wouldn't judge people in a negative way because of a gap. I would look at the rest of the resume, whether or not they were qualified. And then if I felt like they were good enough to interview, I would just ask that question,
Mhm.
because life happens. I mean, we're talking a little bit offline about AI and stuff. We're not robots yet, right?
Right,
We're people. Things happen, people get laid off, people have family members that get sick. There are things that happen that are very easily explained. And
right,
so I would not judge somebody harshly because of that. You have people who were stay-at-home moms and then they decide to go back in the workforce. Like there's always a reason. So I think if otherwise their experience qualifies them, I certainly wouldn't. Um, but I'm one person, right? So you've got to
right.
prepare yourself for the person that does care. One suggestion I would have is create an LLC, right?
Yeah.
Create a business. And so any gap you have, you slap your business on there and then just say you were doing freelance work. Even if that work was volunteer, doesn't matter. But you were doing something and that makes it on the surface appear that you were active and you really didn't have any gaps. And so that's something I would recommend.
I love that. Okay, so before we end today's episode, I want to end with a piece of advice. What's one piece of advice that you would give current job seekers who are really feeling discouraged because they're not getting any interviews right now?
Yeah, I would say it's easier said than done, but
Mhm.
try to be positive, because that like level of discouragement or any kind of negative thinking is very strange, but I personally believe it shows up. It shows up when you're submitting your resume, it shows up when you're sending emails, certainly will show up in an interview. So try your best to stay positive. I know you asked for one piece, but in addition to that, find something to do, right? While we might not find our ideal job or what we're looking for, volunteer, take a part-time job, do some freelance work, because that idea of working will actually, I think, keep you in a much more positive mindset than sitting around consistently being unemployed. So
Mm,
you might not be bringing in the money that you expect or want, but if you're bringing in something more than zero, that can help alleviate some of that like discouragement a little bit. But it also can help you if you do get that interview. The last thing you want is like, well, what have you been doing for the last 6 months?
right.
Looking for a job. Like, that's not enough, right? So staying active is probably the main advice, excuse me, that I would give so that you can remain positive. There are people, I mean, I've talked to people and I'm in a couple of different groups of folks looking for, looking for work, and people have been out of work for like a year, not able to find something. Like there's some really drastic situations. And so the longer you're out of work, I think that hurts you. So find something part-time, find something that is volunteer that you can do to take up some of your time so that you can at least be gaining skills or doing something that you can talk about when you do get that interview.
Right. No, I think that is great advice. And so, to everyone out there, I hope you were taking notes. We provided you all with some great tips. We're kicking
Yeah.
off a new year, so don't worry about what happened in 2025. Don't worry about who
Yeah.
you didn't hear from in 2025. It's 2026. It's a new year. I am seeing more jobs opening up because it is the beginning of the
Good.
new year. And so, see this as a fresh slate, a fresh opportunity to jump back in, go hard, apply for, whatever you see out there that you feel like you're a fit for and that you really want to do, and we're hopeful that 2026 will be the year that you find a new opportunity. But Amy, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining me again today for another episode of
Yeah.
Career Connections. And I look forward to continue the conversation again for our next episode.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Career Connections podcast with Stephanie and Amy. Connect with us on LinkedIn for more career tips, resources, and conversations that help you grow with confidence.